good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. No matter where in the heck in the world you are, it is the Notorious V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of Rogue News. And we have with us the man of the hour who needs no introduction. We are talking about the Dark Raven and the Deep State himself, the analyst of analysts, the Pontiff's Pontiff, the one and only leader of the Trash Pandas himself. Veles is here, and he's going to be breaking down the latest goings and happenings of what is occurring that most people are not even paying attention to. Real behind the scenes info like you've never heard before. So keep it locked and loaded right here. Have your notebooks ready and your dark roast on percolate. And with that being said, Veles, good morning, buddy. How are you?
Good morning, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, my man. I'm hanging in there. You know, we're all 6 feet above ground, so I guess that's a good thing.
Right. We woke up. After that, it's
That's it, brother.
It's all gravy. I like the new opening music. It's a lot, softer,
I'm not behind it. I'm not behind it. So whoever put that there, I don't know if it's Kung Fu or if it's Cowboy. I don't know who did it, but yeah, thanks to whoever that did that.
Okay. Well, and what do you call it? I was on Contrarian Corner on Monday, so my thanks to Ben. I'll get into that a little later on the show. We had a good one. Kind of heavy on the economics side, which is a bit more Ear and Algo's thing, but we covered Canada and all the crazy going on in the world. So today, folks, I'll start with some appetizers for those of you that are on Discord. I posted some of the topics I'm going to cover today, and then a number of you have been asking about or posting stories about what's going on with C-level executives, CEOs, CFOs, etc., and some other stuff out there. So I'm going to delve into that as well this morning. So first appetizer. In the country of Chile last week, they lost power to 98% of the country at one point. One has to ask what kind of impact that's going to have on hospitals, refrigerated medicines, emergency services, and the list goes on. Now, if that was Canada, Mexico, or the U.S., that would seriously be an interesting outcome.
Yeah.
Also, at the same time, one has to ask, was that a warning to Chile over getting too close to China, concerning the whole thing about ports on the western side of the Pacific?
Absolutely.
So I was in Peru during a slight overthrow of the government in 2001, and I've seen what happens in South America when private equity.
I don't count that as a coincidence that you happen to be there where there's a government overthrow.
You know, it's like when I travel. I swear, it's not my fault.
Yeah, every time we have this inside joke between you and I. You're like, V, I'm gonna go travel. I'm like, oh God, just come back home, because usually when you're gone, something always happens.
Well, the worst ones are when I leave the country. That's really what.
No, let's not even go
I'm
there.
marching around Europe, and as soon as I get a cellular signal, my phone's blowing up with you and Algo going, dude, you've got to get back here. This is. Stop it, man.
Oh man.
So sacred symbolisms beyond the blood moon and the solstice in March. Please also note the following: a trinity of moonlanders are landing in close succession. March 2nd, we had the Blue Ghost craft from Firefly Aerospace who landed successfully. And then yesterday, the Intuitive Machines Nova C, letter C, craft landed, although I haven't had a chance to check the news this morning to see if it's functional. They know it landed, but I think it may be sitting on its side. And then in April, iSpace will be landing the Hakuto R, letter R, craft. The Intuitive craft, if it's working, is exploring lunar material for future use as building material. And the Japanese lander is Japan's second attempt at the moon, and it'll test out lessons learned in landing and deploy a small rover. And then Blue Ghost is investigating a number of things, including heat flow from the lunar interior, electric and magnetic field study on the moon, X-ray images of Earth's magnetosphere, and also an attempt to pick up Earth's GPS signals. I find some of the things it's testing about the Earth a little bit of an eyebrow raiser for those of you who know of our constant theme about what's going on with the sun. Next appetizer, there have been efforts to reduce or improve government performance before, my friends, for those of you monitoring what's going on in Washington since the Donald took over. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush all instituted programs or attempted to do so as far as modifying federal workforce or adjusting workforces at agencies, all of which failed. The fact this time it's succeeding is something we'll dig into later today. Some of you may want to review the license plate of the car Princess Diana got into at the restaurant in 1997 versus the license plate of the vehicle she died in. The vehicle she and Dodi the vehicle she and Dodi Fayed got into at the hotel had the license plate of 405 JVJ Joliet Victor Joliet 75, and the vehicle she died in had a license plate of 688 LTV 75. Also, the license plates were entirely different colors, but there's absolutely no coincidences, nothing going on there at all. Veles opinion, Europe realized late last week how little anyone in the U.S. cares about them at this point. Without their biggest fan of the United States, what are they? Recall what I told you last summer after I traveled through Switzerland, France, Spain, and Italy, and as I alluded to a moment ago with V, everyone I met asked me what's going on in the world. They asked me that because they couldn't get meaningful information from their own media. Many of those folks are now listeners to Rogue News, and I'm not kidding. From a rogue listener, the president and his cabinet are some of the best actors money can buy, standing in front of the real power behind them. Tom Luongo's craziest statement yet, but however, on a subtle level, there is some truth to it. He said he's open to believing at this point the U.S. administration may force King Charles to give up the crown as King of England. Now, there's a lot with that statement on many levels. However, we've crossed the Rubicon, and it is possible, regardless of Charles recently motoring around in a naval uniform with Canadian markings. Your Holiness. From Crazy Days and Nights, around the time of the Super Bowl, there were several media postings about how great Ryan Reynolds' voice work was in animation as much as his films. What's the problem with that? Well, the animated films that Ryan Reynolds did the voice work for were many years ago. So what's the 411? It's bots launched by a public relations firm to drown out regular coverage of his wife's problems and his being in her orbit. Now consider what those bots and similar can do when governments use them. When you're destroying fraud and laundering networks who enrich themselves while working in your own government, what do you think the response is going to be? How easy would it be to approach these people and use them to cause havoc inside the United States, like a cyber attack, power grid failure, or similar? Even more so, the quote-unquote aid organizations and recipients of U.S. aid money who no longer are getting their money. The degree of laundering and quantities of money, whether through Ukraine or U.S. aid organizations, just dried up or is in the process of drying up. What is the analogy I often use here on Rogue about what happens when waters recede? There's going to be a response. That response may be scorched earth in nature. We will see. Some mixed news in the over-the-road truck market. And this matters, folks, because it's part of the infrastructure of the country. Class 8 over-the-road trucks, the big ones rolling down the highway or on construction sites, the market demand for those trucks is expected to soften in 2025. However, vocational trucks, who can include Class 6 through 8 trucks, are expected to increase. A Class 6 or 7 truck would be like large ambulances or those mini tractor-trailer vehicles you see pulling horse trailers. The reason for the increase in vocational truck purchases is an oldie but a goodie. The EPA 2027 environmental emissions regulations are prompting users of those vehicles to buy a whole new vehicle rather than install add-on equipment to improve the emissions. To be fair, the vocational truck market has much higher vehicle wear than your traditional over-the-road truck. Things like long periods of idling of the vehicle, operating in off-road conditions, and a number of other factors who contribute to much higher than normal wear. Plus, there's an additional item. Vocational trucks often have a truck cab and a frame, and then the vehicle is sent to a bodybuilding company to stick on the back end whatever's needed, whether that's an ambulance back end, fire truck components, concrete mixers, or whatever else is needed. The backlog in the bodybuilding segment has finally been cleared of delayed vehicles due to supply chain problems going all the way back to the COOF. If you're looking at your investments, and this isn't investment advice, that is something to consider. Speaking of trucking, the over-the-road truck maker Nikola has filed for Chapter 11. They manufacture... Yes, finally. It's dead, Jim. They manufactured electric Class 8 type vehicles. The main reason for them going under, they're no longer getting subsidies from the U.S. government. Boy, look what happens when you let the free market operate the way it's supposed to. A reminder about the intelligence community. I feel like the old joke, Everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. People talk about the intelligence community, but many times which agencies and which functions are we talking about? Here's a little something who's factually true. There's much who can be said about various intelligence organizations and, for that matter, classified consulting groups. Keep in mind the following as well. Employees of the CIA are technically accountable under federal law. Whether they're prosecuted is another matter. Many of you may recall about 2 years ago, we had a group of CIA employees busted for everything from porn to using classified government networks to threaten people, child porn, and the list goes on. It was administratively handled internally by the agency. I believe some people are trying to FOIA the agency into disclosing how many of those folks are still there or were actually punished. So here's the bombshell, and I'm dead serious. Because of the way in which the National Security Agency was stood up, and I'm dead serious about this, they and their employees legally cannot be prosecuted for anything. That's no joke. Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX from the memory hole, a reminder.
Yeah.
While everyone wants the information about Epstein made public, we have no information in the public domain about FTX and the laundering who took place. Plus, as I shared on prior programs, Veles has the unredacted Epstein phone book, among other things. However, even I can't get my hands on the FTX behind-the-scenes details. That is, unless I was to travel to New York and some other places and start talking to people in bars. The cost of the bankruptcy is approaching $1 billion, and per Bloomberg last week, $952 million in fees have been approved by the court. What are those fees? Those are the monies paid to the creditors. Yet the details of who was involved, laundering, and similar is still in the shadows.
Correct. And I've had clients affected by this on the institutional side from the FTX thing. And I think next month, I believe the payouts are going to start coming, but we don't know exactly what they're going to be doing. So there's a lot of mystery behind this. And also, Tucker just interviewed Sam Bank, SBF yesterday. So if you guys want to go check that interview out, I listened to a couple minutes of it. It's pretty good.
The Intel Corporation announced they're going to delay the computer chip plant in Columbus, Ohio for 3 years this week. We've been saying on Rogue that Intel's in trouble, and would that chip plant, who's being built by Israel, by the way, even go forward? For that matter, in the next 6 to 12 months, will Intel merge with another firm? And of course, the obvious one, in the IT industry, 6 months is a lifetime. 3 years is a millennium. Telling me the plant's being delayed by 3 years is pretty obvious what the situation is. So there's also the question of whether or not Intel's going to be merging with somebody given the state they're in. Speaking of chips, don't forget that TSMC said on Monday they're going to invest $100 billion, $100 billion over the next few years into the United States. Much of that spend, about $65 billion, is in Arizona. Pity Ohio can't get in on that. I hear they have a chip manufacturing facility who can be bought cheap. Last appetizer. I know given the media and the distraction of the New York Stock Exchange activity, one would think things are going well economically. Also, the possibility of up to $5,000 hitting your wallets if they give money back from the savings from Doge. Yes, the markets were doing well until this week, where each day we're dropping a couple of 100 points on both the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. However, the reality is we may in fact see a recession very soon. Noting input by people like Carl Denninger, among others, and I added a post on Discord last week, Thursday, because he's not alone in his take on that. There's a reason why we have lots of distractions in the media and the promise of potential money in your pocket to offset the pain, because they know what's coming. We're slashing the cost of government right now, and if the rumors are to be believed, unlike anything we've seen in 50 years. That doesn't just happen. It was planned, authorized, and more important than that, the realization was made it had to happen. Key word, it had to happen. Keep your swivel on, your powder dry, and watch the stars for signs and portents. We're going to get into that a little bit more today. So as I said at the opening, my thank you to Ben over at Contrarian Corner. I appeared on his program earlier this week. You can find Ben on YouTube along with other platforms. His show, Contrarian Corner, is spelled Kontrarian, Corner, Korner. And his icon is 2-letter Ks that are back to back. Very sharp guy, and I wish him well building his online profile. Recent high-profile deaths. A 39-year-old actress, Michelle Trachtenberg, died Wednesday, February 26th. She was known for TV programs like Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The Crazy Days and Nights websites indicated there's a lot to what happened to her when she was at Nickelodeon. This includes people asking her before her death to put in writing those experiences. She evidently told close friends her life on that network was a horror show. Now we may never know. Furthermore, recall two things. Accusations about Hollywood and kids nearly always fell on deaf ears until Corey Feldman and others spoke out in the 1990s. In contemporary time, we have a ton of detail out there on this problem. The second item is whether it is Michelle Trachtenberg or people like Feldman. A major coping mechanism for people who have suffered trauma is addiction. It's one of the reasons why alcoholics' kids are often alcoholics themselves. I say this because the media keeps zeroing in on her recent liver transplant and other addiction problems, the focus being on her addictions as the reason for her tragic death, rather than what caused the addictions, like childhood trauma. The family refused an autopsy on religious grounds, meaning no toxicology or similar. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, as she probably had more than alcohol in her system. On a related note, another Gossip Girl actress, Lisa Lynn Masters, killed herself in a Peruvian hotel room by hanging in 2016. She was 52 at the time of her death. I've been to Peru, and I love Cusco and many other places in that country. I find it a little hard to internalize. A U.S. actress and Nebraska native would go to Peru to commit suicide. Yes, I know she identified her own mental illness struggles in messages she left for her family. Most people that I know tend to find inspiration in Peru, not vindication they need to leave this world. Randy Quaid recently weighed in on Gene Hackman's death, who's part of this narrative. Now, yes, I know Randy's a little out there, but so are a lot of other people, and it doesn't mean they're not speaking the truth. Was Gene Hackman's death part of some cabal's murder plot, the way Randy believes? Who knows? What caught my attention, though, was the stuff in between what he said about Hackman. He said to the effect, when someone is killed in Hollywood, they always do this. They make you focus on their portfolio of films or other matters, and not the unexplained questions about their death. That struck a chord with me, just like the backstory on Michelle and the narrative of, well, you know she had a bad drinking problem. I mean, they replaced her liver. Yes, Your Honor, but what caused the drinking problem? Randy is correct. They have very predictable sets of narratives who always show up in the media exactly at the right time when a high-profile person dies. That alone is a clue to something. God only knows what's going on. And equally recall the other Crazy Days and Nights item I brought up a few shows ago about the musician Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. Everyone says he just plain old died or overdosed in his house. Those who know say he was killed. Speaking of the entertainment industry, a revelation about things in our daily lives where we're unaware of history. When you create a magic wand from wood, the recommended type of tree to use is a holly tree. Said another way, when you cast magic with a wand made from Hollywood. Get it? Of course, that didn't do Michelle or Lisa Masters any good. Programs to watch. If you'd like to open your mind a bit via good documentaries on Netflix or Amazon, I have a list for you. One who I watched recently has 3 volumes, and I've watched volumes 1 and 3. It's called A Clockwork Shining, Kubrick Odyssey 3. Yes, there's content in there most of you are familiar. However, it offers yet again a full profile on MK Ultra, Laurel Canyon, the U.S. Air Force Intelligence movie studio, who just so happened to be up in Laurel Canyon, and a ton of other things. There's also deep coverage of the relationship between Kubrick's movie Clockwork Orange and The Shining. Namely, the movies are a full-scale walkthrough of MK Ultra themes and practices. One of the volumes also focuses on the immense symbolism of the moon landings in The Shining as well. A dual-use film, if you will. The implication being Kubrick filmed footage used for the Apollo 11 moon landing. Of course, that doesn't do it justice. I highly, highly recommend you watch all 3 episodes in the series if you have a chance. Some of the other documentaries are similar worth watching include the following items. Some of these are repeats from other programs where I've raised a couple of these. So first up is Netflix. So on the Netflix service, the first program worth watching is one called The Keepers. It begins with the strange murder of a nun at a Catholic girls' school in Pennsylvania. By the end, you realize she was killed to silence an MK Ultra program that was operating at the school. The next program is This is Zodiac Speaking. Dovetails off the Fox program, delving into new realizations of who the Zodiac may have been. A very good program about the Zodiac killings and probably nails who it was. American Conspiracy offers new details on the death of Danny Casolaro. Cold Case, Who Killed John Benet Ramsey? Mentioned this one on a recent program, and it's very good with new content. Then a double play, Giswell Maxwell, Filthy Rich, and Jeff Epstein, Filthy Rich. Ancient Apocalypse, The Americas, the latest in Graham Hancock's controversial series on Netflix. If you're new to the topic of alternative archaeology, then this and the prior series are a good place for you to get your feet wet. Another one is Unabomber in His Own Words, a good program about the history and investigation into Ted Kaczynski, who also most probably was an MKUltra subject. The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness. This was a real good one. Probably one of the best new investigations into the Son of Sam killings, and yes, it also reeks of MKUltra. The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, The Unheard Tapes. This documentary leverages tapes made by Monroe's psychologists who were believed lost. There's new material in the documentary I hadn't known about until it came out. Then next up, we have the Amazon Prime network and some of the programs there. First is Room 237. This is another documentary about Kubrick focusing on The Shining specifically. A Noble Lie, Oklahoma City, 1995. A good documentary about the bombing in 1995 and efforts to shut down state investigations into it. The Men Who Stole the World is a series of episodes about private equity and similar. Third Eye Spies focuses on CIA remote viewing programs. Then we have Drugs as Weapons Against Us. It profiles the intelligence community involvement in narcotics trafficking in LA and the music industry. Then we have the movie Pi. It's not a documentary, P.I. Not a documentary. It's an underground black and white film from the 1990s. For those of you who are unfamiliar, it delves into numerology. The basic storyline is a guy with horrible migraines who finds his mind is now enabling him to understand highly complex math. As a result, practitioners of Kabbalah and New York's bankers are after him because he can give them nearly limitless power from his capacity to solve equations. If you need a primer on high-end math and why certain groups are obsessed with it, this is a good film. Then Scotland's Hidden Sacred Past. This is one of several of Freddie Silva, the author's documentaries that also kind of cover the books that he's written. So if you don't want to read Silva's books, you can just watch the documentary. I've mentioned Silva before on a number of hidden aspects of ancient history, and I've read a number of his books. One called The Searchers, not the John Wayne film. This is a good documentary by a collection of amateur researchers who pooled their expertise and data into a single place regarding the JFK assassination. And then last up, The Rider with No Hands. This documentary delves into Gary DeVore. Gary is someone I've mentioned frequently on programs in the same realm as the Octopus Story or the Hydra with Danny Casolaro. Certain parties will put a game piece on their Veles bingo cards because Gary DeVore, around the time of his death, was dating Claudia Christian, the sci-fi actress from movies in the Babylon 5 TV series. There you go, Bill. They call him the Rider with No Hands because when his body was found, his hands were missing. You Can't Be Serious. The Wall Street Journal took an unfathomable shot at some very powerful firms last Friday in an article titled, "This company gets 98% of its money from the U.S. government and Doge is coming for them." Who was the central topic of the article? Well, someone I know very well, Booz Allen Hamilton, a former asset of the Carlyle Group who invested $910 million in Booz back in 2008. A little bit of history. At that time, Booz Allen had a big problem. The Booz Allen Commercial Consulting Division was essentially a bunch of partners because they operate on a partner model, not a corporate model of CEOs, VPs, directors. Booz operated more like a law firm with partners and directors. The Booz Allen Commercial Consulting Division was a bunch of very wealthy partners sitting around and getting paid millions of dollars for nothing, or essentially nothing. Their compensation was based on the company's performance, not their specific division. It's a great job if you can get it. Carlyle invested in Booz and bought out the commercial partners and realigned the firm. For their trouble, Carlyle made $2 billion by the time they exited the business. In the world of private equity at that time, it was one of the most profitable investments ever. Booz Allen re-entered the commercial consulting market in 2012 with a whole new division focused on commercial consulting. 12 years later, what do they have to show for their efforts? Well, 2% of the company's revenue is commercial consulting, while 98% is federal. Whoops. Equally, in 2012, 20% of their workforce was focused on IT, and now it's closer to 70%. Why does all of this matter? First, in roughly 2008 or 9, several major media organizations were going to dig into what they considered the scary aspect of government contract work for government. Said more bluntly, and to use the lingo of that era, why were commercial firms' personnel performing work who is purely federal employee or military in nature? It included a weekly expose on each major firm in various newspapers, and then ending with a summary program on Frontline on PBS. At the time, I read the intended topics they wanted to cover with each firm. Let me tell you, I heard people in bars in Washington, D.C. openly discussing why people were not being threatened to stop those stories. Yet when the actual content came out, it was so watered down on each firm, you probably could get better data from Yahoo's business pages. The companies in question were firms like Accenture, IBM, Deloitte, CACI, because they hate being called khaki, CSC, Lockheed, Northrop, Booz Allen, MITRE, and many others. Obviously, phone calls were made, or the whole thing was designed to extort money from those firms. When I saw the Frontline story on PBS, I swear it was entirely their media team driving around Tyson's Corner, Virginia, pointing out cellular towers who weren't owned by cell phone companies and who actually owned them. It was a joke. Second, the authority and fear those firms represented for 20 years cannot be understated. Third, the recent Wall Street Journal piece focused attention heavily on Booz, as well as Accenture, IBM, and Deloitte. My belief is by design because each of those firms represent a specific segment of government work earning billions. So why pursue these firms via a big public story about proving to the government you're actually delivering value? To me, it's because their lock on government is significant and historical. Outside of Lockheed and Northrop, of course, no one wants to mention Boeing right now, lest the mere mention of the company's name causes them to accidentally go bankrupt. I mean, the government still needs planes, for God's sakes. Going after these specific firms publicly sends a message to all other entrenched firms. Just one example is Elon Musk said on Joe Rogan that Congresswoman Susan Collins had told him the Navy was given $12 billion to build submarines. There were no submarines built, and no one knows where the money went. Now, is that a completely factual statement? Who knows? However, I've worked on government contracts where I've seen similar things like that happen. Yet this current pattern in government accountability has occurred before, including under Bill Clinton. Then someone flips a switch and says, we have a new financial model you now have to incorporate into every project to prove you're actually creating value. However, the scale this time appears to be much larger than years past. Then there's that other elephant in the room no one discusses. If the government began these projects by properly monitoring and working with their vendors, you wouldn't have these issues. What's one of the bigger underlying reasons why this sort of come to Jesus is occurring? Because the White House and others behind them are trying to break up something. It demonstrates to me whomever is truly behind this knows what they're doing. It's the factual reality right now of why real estate in the D.C. area has gone into the toilet in the last 45 days. Senior leaders of federal agencies tend to hang on until they can achieve their pensions and seniority goals, not to mention a solid network of contacts. Then they leave and go to work for these very firms at 2 to 4 times the salary they were making. For them, it's like the lottery. And trust me, I've met a lot of these people. They are violent in their behavior. They are owed this. God help you if you get in the way of their leaving the State Department and being denied that sweet director or VP spot at Deloitte. The other half is the whole security clearance angle. When you leave the government employment, or a contractor for that matter, your clearance is still good for about 2 years. As long as you perform a small amount of work periodically, the hourglass gets turned back over and the clock starts all over again. In this new environment, that game with security clearances is now over, or at least severely impaired. Equally, the game of rotating government door to commercial, back to government, back to commercial, starting to look seriously impinged as well. I don't believe Deloitte is vulnerable per se, but I know Accenture and Booz Allen are. In my opinion, Accenture has overextended themselves, and Booz, outside of their AI work, is not what they once were, and their rates are still some of the highest in government contracting. These firms were targeted to make an example of them. This on the heels of other moves who already put a lot of fear in Washington, D.C.'s expensive consulting and contractor community. These are not isolated events and are an intentional pattern to put D.C.'s rich companies on notice. They're on notice as the government gravy train has crashed worse than one of Elon's rockets. Private equity is adjusting their portfolios. Some intel from Mike Moore at True Pundit, aka Pain.tv channel. If you're not a listener of Mike's stuff, please do so. Some takeaways from direct intelligence he got from folks in the private equity space. We at Rogue are not offering investment advice. This is just data for you to use as you see fit. Mike has reminded his audience several times in the new year what we often say on Rogue: review, sustain, and adjust your sources of information. He's expressed concerns shared by others of a subprime crisis hitting the U.S. soon. Debt-to-income ratios of FHA borrowers are higher than 43% for a large portion of their portfolios. Oh, and FHA had a program to help make payments for folks who were missing their payments. Where did that money come from, and how long until Doge cuts it? It's a direct repeat of what occurred in 2006 and 2007 with real estate. If you're writing loans who should not be written, and you subsidize loans who are in trouble, why would you not just keep writing those loans? It's free money. Other observations include more than 60% of FHA borrowers are no longer qualified for loans, and the existing portfolio is a mess. Among his other comments were insights directly from his sources in private equity. These include many of them overhauling their portfolios to adjust focus. Now, you all heard me just say what I said, but let me pause about what I just said. Private money, managed privately by firms like Vanguard, Carlyle, State Street, and BlackRock, they don't just adjust their portfolios. Oh, sure, they tweak them, but they spend millions on making sure what they're investing in will make a maximum profit. Just ask Booz Allen. So for them to adjust means one of two realities. They either made a mistake, and if that happened, you'll never work in that industry again, or something changed in the global economy. You know where my brain is. The game has changed, so they changed. One of the key interests in these newly adjusted portfolios is AI investments. These include specific areas where AI is going to displace workers, who said another way means cost savings for organizations by doing so. By the way, even if AI is smoke and mirrors, roughly 5 of the biggest private equity firms are investing in it. What do you think the odds are those firms will create a public narrative assuring everyone the investments are legitimate? Another area of attention is physical infrastructure in the form of data centers, power grid builds, and an area always hiding in the background, that being water. Your larger data centers, or power plants for that matter, often require fresh water. Another layer of investment is anything supporting AI systems, such as hardware, software, and chips. Plus, if you need large quantities of low-cost water, you no longer want to build those data centers in Texas, Arizona, California, or even Virginia. Yes, TSMC is dropping $100 billion, mostly in Arizona, and if that's not politics, I don't know what is. That and the cheap desert land in Arizona. But locating expensive manufacturing in regularly occurring 100-degree weather and ever-decreasing water availability seems a bit risky to me. In my opinion, you want to locate these data centers in the Midwest, and by the way, many firms are, as well as the manufacturing, due to cost containment and the fact they're geographically in the middle of the country. So that means giddy up, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, and Ohio, among others. The Epstein files. Will there be more detailed released on the Epstein files? Who knows? Pam Bondi is now indicating that after the trucks from the FBI dropped off new material, it's going to be redacted for national security reasons. Where have we heard that one before? You knew that was coming. A number of quote-unquote conservative or alternative sources have said what was released last week was already on the internet. That's akin to saying it's on the dark web, and you shouldn't go to the dark web ever, even if your laptop was bought at a garage sale and you're accessing the internet via a connection at a truck stop. I say that because the dark web is an intelligence operation and very little of any good comes from it. In the immortal words of a fraternity brother of mine on a different topic, absolutely nothing good can come from the mainstream media releasing anything out of those files. Like any of these stories, we are missing some obvious points. First, underage girls or prostitution comments from the mainstream media. That's a bunch of crap. This is rape of children. Second, it was girls and boys, not just girls. Third, it recently came out Disney Cruises many years ago had kids snorkeling at Little St. James owned by Epstein. You heard me correctly. Disney sent cruise ships with kids on board to Epstein's islands. Releasing real meaningful information on this story is radioactive with no cure. Everyone gets burned and killed on all sides from all factions by real disclosure. So there can be no real disclosure. For anyone with intention, you could conduct your own research and probably find some things not in the public domain. Shared on a prior program about 2 years ago, a buddy of mine and I drove through New Mexico. We were literally just down the road from Epstein's former ranch, who was for sale, and even I felt it was a bit risky to go there. So we didn't go there. Of course, one could take a few months and review real estate records, subpoena construction and maintenance firms who worked at that New Mexico ranch, the helicopter companies who drop people off, etc. You could probably build yourself a fascinating book who, when published, would make you a couple of bucks. That is, if you live long enough to publish it. Equally, there's content in the criminal evidence files who, even if you saw it, you would not understand what you're looking at. I'm not saying that to be insulting. It's just you're not read in on a number of things, and it won't have any meaning to you. Oh, sure, high-profile people having sex with kids, you'll probably be able to tell who's in the film clips. I'm talking about payments to organizations for whom you have no reference, movement of artwork and antiquities, bullion movements, and similar. Veles, what do you mean antiquities? That's as far as I'm going to go with that, but it is a clue. Pursue it at your own risk. Ironically, for a moderate sum of money, Russian intelligence can sell you what they stole out of the police evidence locker in Florida a number of years ago. I know some bars in Cuzco, Peru, where you might be able to find said Russians. For that matter, a few nights in South Beach in Miami, and there are other Russians who, for hard cash, could also help you find that information. But that's another story. The sit rep on the corporate world and beyond. Strap in for this one, folks. Several weeks ago, I shared with you some very critical data points about the current state of many commercial firms. There are some correlations in other areas of the economy, and it's most notable with private and public firms. What's the real takeaway? There is self-directed turnover by directors, VPs, and C-level executives everywhere. Interestingly, we also now have a surge in C-level executives who are leaving. Zero Hedge, among other media sources on Thursday, pointed out CEO exits have hit their highest level in more than 22 years. Now, when somebody says something like 22 years, maybe we ought to ask, well, what was 22 years ago? 22 years ago was the downstream hit from all the post-Y2K layoffs in 2001 and the 9/11 attacks. What are these C-level departures in dog years? It's about 200 plus C-level executives a month from December through January. The highest figures were in the government sector CEOs, followed by IT firms. I take some issue with the government figure because those have to be contractors, not federal agencies. The equivalent in most federal agencies are what are known as agency secretaries or deputy secretaries, or what they call DepSecs. Further, when I say many of these departures are self-directed, I mean they are resigning. They're not being forced out. What we discussed on that prior program is they're resigning because as self-interested actors, they know all too well what their annual performance needs to be to reach their bonus targets. For those of you not too familiar with executive compensation, it's not just about money. When you reach that level in the corporate structure, you have your own personal calculation tables because you're working to achieve a dollar target for a very comfortable retirement. I personally know senior leaders who reached out to me for help finding another job when they realized within 6 months of a new job, their earnings were already off. Nor is this about greed, far from it. This is how that world works. And it's rarely something MBA programs ever cover. I went to a great MBA program, and executive compensation questions by me to my professors were greeted with blank stares. So what's the problem? The targets they're trying to reach cannot be achieved in the current economy. They can't be achieved by design. They just didn't realize that till they took those jobs. Further, I've heard directly from people that their compensation agreements had obscure language and or were redrafted midstream. Therefore, what's our root problem here? Massive cost cutting by firms, and there's a point at which, when you cut too far, you run the organization into the ground. Therefore, either you met your cost target, but it hurt the business operations, which resulted in an impact to your compensation, or conversely, you missed the cost target and your compensation was hit. The net of this being you get much less of your anticipated compensation, including deferred stock and other benefits. During that program, I covered how this behavior has accelerated in many industries. So now that we've rebaselined this narrative, let's dive further into reports from the field. I've been in discussions with a ton of folks about their current employment situations. Mind you, it's important to keep in mind the data I'm about to share with you are the results of months of activity and behavior who is surfacing now. Said another way, this all began months ago. It just took this long for enough data to prove this is what's happening. That doesn't even begin to disclose the massive flight out of federal agencies right now, confusion among government and defense contractors, and all the questions about which universities are still receiving their grant money. So what's the 411? I have directly provided information from individuals at medical organizations, hospital groups, financial firms, information technology companies, manufacturers, and the list goes on, reporting to me their respective leaders are essentially running them into the ground. This is where my being older than 50 gives me some perspective, also known as memory, about data in the public domain. To paraphrase a scene from The Fifth Element, I know this music. In my past, what I'm observing in contemporary time used to only be a very narrow sector of the market, or even maybe 3 or 5 companies in a single industry who essentially were an oligopoly. This time it's across the board in nearly every sector of the economy, from private to public. So why would senior leaders essentially run their own companies into the ground with the authorization of the board of directors? Well, here's the bomb, and I'm going to step out on a bit of a ledge here with what I'm about to say. They're doing this because they're trying to cut such large amounts of cost out of these firms that they can be bought either in mergers or by private equity. Some of you, the minute you heard me throw out private equity, a bulb may have gone off, and recall what I said earlier, that being readjusted portfolios of private equity. If private equity is authorizing this, then that's by design, and it's a plan, not an unintended consequence of the economy. Also, an out on the ledge statement, if the point was something along the lines of this current economy is incapable of producing wealth, so our plan is to merge several firms, that doesn't pass the test. Ergo, this may be some sort of social engineering at work, and given the self-interest of senior executives, they're going along with it. Then you factor in the massive turnover and confusion in the federal sector, including defense contractors and the R&D community with universities. This could potentially turn into an earth-shaking change in employment at all levels in the economy. So what are the facts? For many industries, and in particular information technology, there are serious product problems out there. Whether it's Microsoft, NVIDIA in the chip world, General Motors 8-cylinder truck engines that are failing, or accounting behemoths like SAP and Oracle. Recall in my prior program, I pointed out that now NHTSA, NHTSA is investigating GM for these truck engine failures that are occurring because of the, the fuel-saving software they've got on board. The total number of engines who may need to be recalled is about 900,000 engines. That'll cost you. Are these problems known? Yes. Does the means exist to repair or address them? Yes. Is anyone going to follow through on those things? No. That's the same story you've heard about the national power grid in the United States and its vulnerabilities. In the medical sector, following the huge influx of money during COVID, they've been coasting on their own momentum for years. However, growth and new money for them just isn't possible. The only thing they can do is cut costs and pray for a merger. I know factually of a Midwest medical group whose former CEO and his fellow C-levels pulled off some serious fraud. The feds are still looking into it. Therefore, there will still be fines no one wants to pay. If those fines occur, that medical group has to find a way to avoid paying them. It's my personal favorite in these situations. Run it into the ground, declare bankruptcy, pay pennies on the dollar to your creditors and federal agencies for the fines you owe, and then merge the company. Look at what occurred recently with the restaurant chain Hooters. Say what you will about the business concept, but the minute they lost that huge court case with the giant payout, it wrecked the whole company. Many financial firms have folks on the inside telling me their top sales and financial advisors want to bail. When senior leaders are confronted about how the new compensation agreements are driving their best talent out the door, they're essentially met with laughter. The attitude being everyone in that sector is doing the same thing right now. Therefore, where are you going to go? Of course, that's not a true statement, but they're trying to make people believe that. I saw this same behavior during the dark days of GE under Jack Welch. You drive cost out of a business you want to unload and let your best people go. Then you clandestinely monitor them after they leave, and if they demonstrate serious talent at a new organization, well, then they've proven themselves, and we need to bring them back when you get your house in order. I've seen this a ton of times, folks. I've seen it a ton of times. In fact, I've seen it so often, I should probably just make some laminated cards people can keep handy to explain how this nonsense is going to go down. As a sidebar, what is the big money doing in response to all of this? Because you better believe they're aware of it. They're moving into commodities, and yes, gold. I don't want to sound like an infomercial about buy gold coins today, but that is what's happening. And further, we're not dispensing financial advice here on Rogue when I say gold. And when I say gold, I'm talking about mining futures, smelters, and similar, as well as vaulted gold somewhere. Something for whom most of us, that's outside our price range. Small sidebar. Las Vegas is dead right now as far as hotel reservations and activity in the casinos because consumers are protecting their money. It's one of many clues and facts we've got out there that when combined are painting a picture of where this is going. Another step out on a ledge moment for me. Because this narrative is the DNA of the U.S. and global economy, now more than ever, this has to be monitored closely. Recall what I said earlier about the potential of a recession, who often results in merger activity and massive cost slashing. Given the giant binders many global leaders, including the White House, are operating from right now, the long-term goals they're pursuing are becoming more clear, while other aspects remain hidden. They're going to remain hidden by design until it's time to reveal them. Tom Luongo, Perspective on Global Behavior. Tom said something interesting last Thursday and worth consideration. He said the deep state in the United States, or whatever you want to call that, is roughly 80 years old. The equivalent of the deep state in Europe is hundreds, if not thousands of years old. Obviously a reference to the belief Western Rome never truly fell. He went on to say it takes a lot to exit that structure in the U.S. It takes even more for the United States to pull itself out of the influence of the one in Europe, ergo Ukraine and many other things. So my final summary on all of this. Noting what I said a moment ago about the reasoning of what's going on in major corporations and Tom's review in extricating yourself from the deep state, let me say the following. I'll use a funny analogy before I get into the more terrifying aspects of this. The comedian Cat Williams often includes in his humor that both Donald Trump and the United States in general tend to operate globally like gangsters. He jokes about the U.S. invasion of Iraq and pretends the United States is standing over Iraq saying, "Say my name again, say it, bitch." Let us consider the dialogue in the movie Margin Call when Kevin Spacey's character Sam Rogers says, and this is the famous boardroom scene, "The real question is, who are we selling this to?" And Jeremy Irons, as the chairman, John Told, says, "The same people we've been selling it to the last 2 years and anybody else who will buy it." Spacey's character says, "But John, if you do this, you'll kill the market for years. It's over. And you're selling something you know has no value." And Told's character, as Jeremy Irons, gets angry and says, "We are selling to willing buyers at the current fair market price so
One of my
that
favorite scenes of all time.
so that we may survive."
Yes.
And in the words of
Epic
Veles,
scene.
excellent scene, amazing scene. And in the words of Veles, so that the United States may survive. And I'm going somewhere very serious with this. And I don't even, folks, I'm not kidding you. There are times when I'm writing up this material and it's like I start deleting stuff saying, I can't say that. That's a little too much. But the magnitude, it's almost beyond the capacity of a human being to internalize what we're living through right now and what is actually happening. Doge is cutting bad money, and frankly some good money, out of federal agencies to cut our U.S. debt. U.S. debt and debt payments are greater than the Department of Defense budget. Consider that for a moment. Bigger than the DoD's budget. And then also consider the other things I've said today. They're going through all the defense and government contractors and think tanks to determine what work is really needed. Not just are you providing value, I know I said that earlier, but it goes deeper than that. Even if you've got a project and it does good stuff, they're still cutting it unless it's absolutely necessary. And large chunks of those portfolios are going to get cut. You can count on it. Now, recall my other mantra that I've said on this show. I know V has said it. Others out there have said it. The United States has $1 trillion each of credit card debt, car loans, commercial real estate, and college loan debt who's at risk of never being paid. That's $4 trillion. That's $1 trillion more than the annual GDP of California. And California's GDP is bigger than most countries. That's the kind of scale of what we're talking about. So when you got to fix big problems, you have to take old world, Old Testament colossal measures. The United States is literally threatening Ukraine to pay us back part of the $100 billion they received out of their natural resources. The U.S. is threatening to seize or make vassal states or protectorates out of Canada and Greenland. The United States is raising tariffs on everyone unless they agree to a new set of trade guidelines. The United States is threatening to go cold turkey with NATO. We made Zelensky come to the White House and drop a knee before the president. And of course, the plan was to sign a peace agreement before it turned into a screaming match, and we sent him packing. And of course, the last few weeks, the media is filled with him saying, hey, I was just kidding. We still can sign an agreement. We made the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, come to the White House and drop a knee and sign an agreement. The same occurred within a month of taking office with leaders of Canada and France. Regardless of the cross-border yelling right now between the United States and Canada, and of course the fact that Trudeau was crying on TV yesterday, that's the truth. Canada's reality knows the situation. There are 40 million people in Canada. There are 350 million plus in the United States. This is medieval era stuff, folks. You're coming to the king's castle or tent, and you're agreeing to terms. No one is traveling to Europe. They're coming here. The symbolism is obvious. And for fans of Donald Trump, don't get too excited. This isn't about him. This is about who he works for and what the new order of things is going to be. You've, to quote Gus Demos, you've lived long enough to witness something this monumental in your lives, my friends. And I'll be violently blunt. One could make the argument, to note the dialogue from Margin Call, as the U.S. economy is still the bigger engine driving the world, that the United States is too big to be allowed to fail, so that we may survive. So therefore, we, the United States, we are blackmailing the planet to make sure that the United States economy survives so that everybody else will survive with us. It's just our survival comes first. And it's going to be ugly, and it's going to be horrendous, and it has to be done. In the Dune series, there's a statement about how when Paul Atreides becomes emperor, he launches the Holy Jihad and the Holy War, and billions of people die in that storyline. Yet, ironically, the author says if he hadn't launched the jihad, humanity's fate would have been worse. Yeah. Billions had to die to save humanity in that storyline. And we're facing a global situation that one could say has a lot of parallels. Now, I'm no fool. I know powerful people with eugenics on their brains still want to put a chip in people's heads. But one could make the argument the original grand plan for the global economy post-Bretton Woods under the London Corporation was determined that it was failing and it was going to fail. Therefore, a new plan and a new model is being implemented instead. Stay loose, folks, and keep your swivel on, and remember those celestial events who are coming up quickly. I yield the floor, sir.
Awesome show, man. That was fantastic. And the examples you brought out were truly just prolific. We're locking arms with other countries, and we are saying to each of us and to those partners that are with us, we're going to make it through this. And it's amazing to see it. And I mean, look who's going to help broker the Iran-U.S. talks.
Right?
Which is what? It was the Russians, Vladimir Putin. So Europe is cooked. I have no other way of saying it, and we're seeing the end. And I talked to my finance guys, I talked to my equity guys, and the thing is like it's London, the city of London Corporation is being cooked alive, and I'll tell you that as somebody who works within the framework of the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association. They're being cooked alive. It's incredible to see what is happening, man. It truly is. And you hit the nail on the head. Nobody's flying to the UK. Nobody's flying to Europe. Nobody's flying to Gibraltar. Nobody's flying to the island of Jersey. No one's going to the Isle of Man. No one's going to Cayman. They're all coming here. They're all bowing the knee, man. It's incredible to witness this.
Well, and two things on what you just said. The first is my comment about Las Vegas. I say it tongue in cheek, folks, but there's great truth to what I'm saying. The other place that has had a massive drop off, I don't want to say tourism, but in business flights, no joke, is Switzerland. The second thing is, V, to what you're saying, and I know you and I have a special place of loathing in our hearts for Jim Cramer, but before Jim went completely off the rails, back during 2007 or 2008, when the market crash was just beginning, and Jim Cramer was on CNBC live in an afternoon broadcast, and it was that famous rant he went on that they called the rant heard around the world, where he's screaming into the camera saying The central banks have no idea what's going on. None. And that's what your comments remind me of, because I mean, it's we all have that. I don't want to say blinders, folks. That's not the right way to put it, but we all have our own worldview based on where we are and where we live. And I go to the West Coast and often remind people on the West Coast, here's what's going on in the rest of the country, and they just kind of look at me funny, like we don't understand. And I'm like, they feel the same way about you. We've all become so firewalled off from each other, we don't really internalize what your life or world is like. And so, because I've seen this happen so many times in organizations, folks, especially during mergers, when departments are so fixated on their own survival, their capacity to see the big picture gets worse. And so right now, financial people are talking to me, and V always will have a better view of this than I do. But from my limited access to folks in the financial world, they're in so much pain right now. I'm telling them, but by the way, you are aware, and I rattle off a bunch of things, and they're almost dropping their slide rules, saying, "What? Wait, when the hell did that happen?" And it's like, you're so fixated on your own pain right now. Yep. And the stupidity of what you're dealing with. And my manufacturing friends are like, well, I was thinking of going over the wall. And I'm like, whoa. And go where? Well, to another airline manufacturer. Who? I don't think you've looked out the window lately. Well, God, that's really depressing. Yes, it is. But you can't fix what you don't. Yes, I tell my consulting clients all the time, I can't fix what I don't know. Don't lie to me. Don't hold back anything. I've got a non-disclosure agreement. You've got to tell me what the hell's going on around here, because we are going to fix the wrong problem if we're not paying attention. And this is why I've often said on at least my programs on Rogue that whoever and however, the last 4 years when Joe Biden was in the White House, have no illusions. Very powerful people. This is not Republicans. This is not Democrats. This is not conservatives. This is not liberals. Very powerful people were burning a lot of coffee. And I say binders, I'm joking. It's more like electronic records that are probably encrypted 6 ways from Sunday. But plans were developed, highly complex plans, with especially contingencies and countermeasures. If this happens, then we do this. If this happens, then we do this. But the end goal must be this. They came out of the gates storming, to quote Margin Call. And they are moving. And as I've said on my last 2 shows, there is no Christian way this happens where the media is just kind of like shrugging, saying, whoa, and then the White House is doing this. And it's like, if this was 2016, your desk from which you're sitting while you're reading the news would be on fire. And you're just kind of shrugging, going, well, they just closed the department. They closed the Department of Education. There should be cities burning to the ground, not because I think the Department of Education, I was going to say DOE, but that's Department of Energy, not because I think the Department of Education serves a purpose. I know people who worked there. I know they genuinely believed in what they were doing. I would be the first to say create a federal standard and let the states implement it. But they're closing down the Department of Education. Damn. I mean, and it's not going to stop there. And then, again, you have various global events going on as well. This is not just the United States. It's happening worldwide. I wouldn't say centrally managed. It probably is. But somewhere, a whole lot of somebodies are just absolutely, the car is up on a lift rack right now, folks. The transmission and the engine have been removed, and they're installing a new engine and a new transmission. This is what's happening. We've got commercial, we've got federal, we've got defense, we've got contractors. Everybody is getting hit. And for anybody out there that's worried about their job or has perhaps been let go, hang in there. I've been through that myself a number of times. I had a close friend of mine reach out yesterday, and they want to start setting up a help page for feds who've been laid off and help them, redo their resumes and stuff. And I asked them, I said, what is your intention? And they go, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, are you going to try and help them find other federal work? What do you mean? There's going to be less chairs when the music starts again. Like, you've got to consider maybe switching to other industries or other things. And that's why, yes, I believe there's quite a bit of smoke and mirrors going on. But I got to tell you, I know a whole lot of IT people right now that are just sitting there rubbing their hands going, come on, data centers. Because it's like, as soon as those suckers are built, they don't care what state they're in. They're either going to support them virtually or on site. I've spent a number of years myself in data centers. It's almost like the old call center reality of the 1980s. Everybody else started out in a call center somewhere. So it's like, do we really need all these data centers and power plants? That's a show for another time. But will it help employ a whole bunch of people? Yes. You know, what's another Veles jingle that I've said on these shows many times? Why is it that the main Colosseum in Rome was built so well? Because there were many Colosseums. But that one was built very well, but it was the least artistic of any of them. Why? Because it was built by all the soldiers who'd come home from the Carthaginian wars. And in the words of an art professor of mine, the last thing you want to do is have a bunch of unemployed killers walking around Rome looking for work. So you create public works projects. Look at the American highway system following World War II. This is not a new model. This has been done before. And after we wrapped up in Iraq and Afghanistan, or largely so, after 2003, what happened? Well, we started employing a ton of those people in the oil fields out in Wyoming and Montana and in North Dakota. So there's going to be a massive employment shift. And there's a whole bunch of people, because I'm seeing it with some of my academic clients, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to have to now start actually, I don't want to say proving they did good work, but you're just going to have to get better. That's the better way of putting it. You have to get better at explaining what the value is of the work you did. I had conversations with some people who were used to receiving grant money from federal agencies in the academic world. And I said, what's your burn rate? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, okay, that's a problem. I said, what's your burn rate? How much money are you consuming every month or even every week of the money that you've got in the bank from the last grant you received? Because that'll help you determine, can you slow things down a bit? Can you spread the work out? Can you move some of the graduate students back into just classwork, something? Well, this is all very foreign to us. Not to me. I did this in the commercial sector a million times when money started to slow down. But I'm like, you need to factor in and understand how long until the money runs out. Because the universities across the country are all screaming bloody murder about, oh my God, you can't turn off the money. And it's like, right. And yeah, I know you've had some court victories, but I know a little something about the courts. Not as much as Bill, but I know a little something about the courts. There's going to be appeals. And even if the final judgment from a court somewhere says, okay, turn the money back on to, let's just say, the University of Tennessee, it's still going to take time. And in that time, which is its intention, a lot of people either left a graduate program, went and got a job, switched majors, whatever it might be. But I assure you folks, the pain is unbelievable out there. I know several universities where they're just from the National Institutes of Health alone. I know of universities that are receiving between 50 to 90 million a year. You take 50 to 90 million dollars a year out of an R&D program in a university, you're going to feel that. And these people are, and I'm like having conversations with people out on the side of the building doing the Goodfellas thing with my hand up to my lips going, look, I know you hate conservatives, and I know you hate commercial people, even though, like, without us, you have no tax base. But hey, look, man, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I had some people asking me, can you give us like some guidance? And I'm like, I'll do better than that. I'll give you some PowerPoints and stuff. It'll give you all the guidance you need on how to do this. But you got to get better at communicating what these programs are doing, because when the money gets turned back on, you'll be in a worse state than you're in right now. Well, what do you mean? Well, you're not the only department who needs this money. Oh, God. Yeah, there you go. So when the money gets turned back on, everyone's going to say, well, it has to go to us. And if you're not making the best argument, you're still not getting any money, and you're losing all your grad students. Oh, God, this is horrible. Yeah, yes, isn't it? Well, you seem to enjoy it. I do. Not because I hate you personally or even hate you professionally. It's because I'm a big believer in pain. Pain is clarifying. Pain clears out all the ambiguity. Is, in the words of G. Gordon Liddy, pain allows you to get right to the heart of the matter. And you all haven't felt this kind of pain since probably the end of World War II. So it's a new day here on campus. So anyway, V, any final thoughts for you, my friend?
Nah, man, you said it all. It was perfect. Absolutely. Folks, I want to thank all you guys for listening in, and we'll be back next week. Enjoy your weekends, everyone. Cheers.